and he's also been a focus missionary at the University of Vermont. So that's the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. As a Catholic counselor and psychotherapist, Gian finds his calling in helping people who feel alone or angry, who are seeking freedom from addiction, from drug and alcohol addiction, those who may feel ashamed or feel voiceless, despairing, or powerless, and want to experience freedom in Jesus Christ. For Gian, he says it's life-giving for him to work with adolescents, particularly in the age group of 14, and then going on all the way into young adults up to 35. He's excited to practice therapy in accordance with the teachings of the Catholic Church, and bases that on the personalized needs of each client and integrates the healing power of Christ into all his therapeutic methods. So I'm very happy and grateful to welcome Gian, and he did share with me he recently got engaged as well. So congratulations on his engagement. So thanks, Gian. Molly is here, so congratulations to Molly as well. So congratulations, count on our prayers as you advance to the sacrament of matrimony. So thank you, Gian. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Okay, just making sure this is working. Everybody can hear me. Maybe up a little bit more, even better. Okay, very good, very good. Well, just want to start out by thanking all of you so much for being here. Just taking the time out of your busy schedules and all the craziness that we all have going on. So it's an honor for me to be here and to speak with all of you. So a little bit about myself. Monsignor introduced me pretty much. I'll just add, I'm from Bucks County, so from the area. Went to St. Agnes in Sellersville growing up, and then a lot of years later became a missionary after falling away from the faith for a few years during college. So I was raised Catholic, fell away from the faith for a few years during college, and then came back and through Focus, became a missionary. So I ran a lot of Bible studies and did a lot of mentoring for college guys. And then I became a counselor. Became a counselor after that. Felt this call to integrate my faith into counseling. So I was looking at programs. I was like, I don't know if any of these are going to be a good fit. It's just not. We're not on the same wavelength with the worldview. So I found this program called Divine Mercy University. So I got my counseling degree there, and they do a great job of, yes, they take secular counseling and research, but they integrate it into a Catholic anthropology and a Catholic worldview. I was like, bingo, that is what I want. I'm going. So I did that, graduated in 2021, and they just opened up a doctoral program in counseling just 1 year ago. So I am a part of that now. So that's what keeps me busy into the wee hours of the morning. So that's a little bit about myself. Obviously, I'm engaged, so thank you, everyone, for that. So in terms of why I'm here, so I wanted to give a talk, and I thought that what kind of more important issue among especially young people is how do we live our Christian faith, and how do we interact with the world, particularly with the issue of technology. So I'm going to get into a lot more of that, but it's just a huge thing that obviously there's tremendous opportunities for good things in the world, but particularly for young people, there's a lot of opportunities for danger and for harm as well. Okay, let me make sure I have my timer started. Okay. So a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about parenting, particularly in the Christian life. The Catechism talks about, the sacraments talks about how we are to live as Christians. And so I'm going to reference that and kind of set the scene for living as parents. and then I'm going to start going a little bit more into technology specifically. So some of the harms, some of the dangers of technology use or overuse or misuse, what children need to grow up well, and how technology can take away from that, and then some recommendations for how we can navigate technology for. And one thing, I think the talk is titled Technology in the Teen Years. That is the focus, but it's going to be really difficult to talk about that without talking about really the whole of childhood. You can't just kind of isolate it without the context. So I'm going to talk a lot about childhood as well as the teenage years and young adult years. So as we begin, I'd like to invite all of you to close your eyes. You can close your eyes, and we're going to do a very brief meditation. So, bring yourself back to your own teenage years. When you were first walking into high school. Some of the things that were going through your mind. Some of the things that you were feeling. Some of the things that you were worried about. Just put yourself back in those shoes, and now try to imagine what it would be like to have all of the technological resources that we have now. To have a laptop, to have a phone at your fingertips at all times, to have social media where there's constant interactions with other people, not at the same time, constant images being thrown at us that are kind of curated, kind of like the very airbrushed versions of people's lives that we're seeing. But then we look at ourselves, and it doesn't look very airbrushed. Okay, you can open your eyes now. So some of the things that we know teenagers struggle with, being afraid, being insecure, in that period of life in particular, seeking a sense of identity, seeking a sense of acceptance with other people, wanting to fit in desperately sometimes, and kind of doing whatever is necessary to make that happen. In general, there's often a struggle with impulse control and being able to control ourselves. Social pressure, comparison, and kind of the difficulty with just sitting in ourselves and being ourselves in that moment. I mean, that can be hard for people of all ages, but in particular, as teenagers, there's a lot of there can be a lot of motivating reasons to depart from that. So I also want to recognize, I think it's a really particularly hard time to be a teenager in this world. I also think it's a particularly hard time to be a parent, because parents are helping to navigate children and teens through this period of time, with all of the good things and all the chaos and everything going on in the world, and they're facing their own pressures. You all are facing your own pressures with your families and your friends and people you grew up with, and whatever pressures of the world that you have on you, as whatever you do for work outside of the home, whatever you do as a parent. I know there's kind of this microscope on people these days, they feel, where it's like they're doing too much or they're not doing enough, or it's never quite right. It's never quite right. There's kind of this constant criticism that sometimes people feel from the world. So just want to acknowledge that to start out, and so okay. So I want to kind of situate ourselves. So, is everyone here Catholic? It's okay if you're not. It's totally okay if you're not. I'm just wondering. Obviously, we're here in a Catholic church. I think your kids are in the youth group. But just wanted to kind of see where everybody is on that spectrum. So as Catholics, we have the sacraments. Those are our primary ways to grow in relationship with Jesus. So the first one being baptism. Most of us were baptized as infants. I know I was. I have no memory of it. I'm a little jealous of converts, actually, who have the experience of being able to remember their baptism. At the same time, that is the role of our parents and our godparents, is to remind us, of our baptism, and to remind us of that beautiful day that we were, the Catechism says, the gateway to life in the Spirit. The gateway to life in the Spirit. And the door which gives access to other sacraments. Through baptism, we are freed from sin and reborn as sons of God. And I think that right there is the beginning of everything we do is our relationship with God, is us seeing ourselves as sons and daughters of the Father. Without that kind of launch pad, I think we're already misaligned. So I think it's a really beautiful way as well to start. And it also says, the Catechism says, we are made sharers in the mission of the church. So what is the mission of the church? Spreading the gospel. Making disciples. Pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's not that complicated. It's not easy, but it's not that complicated, right? To become saints ourselves and to take as many people with us as we can. So absolutely. And so I think that, again, how does that relate to parenthood, right? We're going to get there. So the next sacrament that is relevant, and this is not the situation of every person or every family, but the sacrament of matrimony is obviously another important step along the way that a lot of parents go through before they become parents. And so the Catechism says, this covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life is, by its nature, ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation of offspring. Procreation and education of offspring. So this kind of gets a little more specific, right? We're getting a little more specific. Okay, we know that as married people, we're called to obviously prioritize God, right? It's a sacrament with God. We're called to prioritize each other, the spouses. That's the second in order of things. That's kind of second, and then third, the education, the procreation and education of children. And so that's it's right up there, grouped in with relationship with spouse and relationship with God, and everything else. Work, leisure, extended family, all that stuff. All that stuff is a little lower. It's a little lower on the tier than those top three, priorities. And I certainly find that people who live that way, or strive to live that way, we're all kind of making progress but not perfect. It makes a difference, It makes a difference. You probably have some idea that I see some of you nodding your heads of how that works in your own life. So some other relevant concerns for us as Catholic parents, is the reality of Satan. So I think that there's a lot of movement to not acknowledge the realities of the spiritual realities of the good spirits, the bad spirits, Satan and God. And sometimes there can be kind of this want to well, that's not really what we believe. That's not really a part of our faith. I was at a dinner party years ago, and I was talking about, some spiritual reading. I mean, I'm kind of intense. There was some spiritual reading I was doing, and they were talking about hell, and people were like, well, they were raised Catholic, born Catholic, all throughout their lives. They're like, well, that's just a story, right? We don't really believe that. We do. We do believe that. We do 100% believe that there is a being out there who is stronger than ourselves, who, not without Christ, but on our own, who wants to destroy us, wants to destroy our souls, wants to destroy the family being the kind of the most perfect way through God's design that he wants to share his love with the world. So the devil is real. He hates the family. He wants to destroy it by any means possible. We must be on guard for his ways and his workings, and how he can be a threat to us and our children. So another thing that I want to say to kind of set this up, so as I was doing some research preparing for the talk, I was kind of finding that there seems to be a kind of a strain of thought of seeing parenting as a set of skills, a set of skills that we are to learn and to master and to become good at. And yes, there is something to developing skills, but at the end of the day, it's about the relationship. It's about the relationship that we have with our children and with our teens. And so one way to illustrate this, an example or a metaphor, is being a gardener versus a carpenter. So a carpenter makes these exact measurements, measure twice, cut once, kind of is very precise with how they mold the wood. And a gardener, on the other hand, is a bit more of there's a bit more of a freedom there. So we're working with something that we can't totally control. So we have to help provide the conditions under which a plant thrives, the sunlight, the water, maybe repotting or moving around if there's not enough of some of those conditions. So I think that is a really good analogy for parenting, rather than something that we have to kind of this death grip control over, but rather something that we are helping to nourish and facilitate, and to allow what happens to happen in a certain sense, being able to let go of that control. So, getting into technology, how did we get here as a society? I think that we've all seen to some extent the ways that communities have become less closely knit. Even I remember going outside and all the neighborhood kids would play together. A lot of places I go these days, you don't see that. You don't see that. Everyone's in their homes. They're often using their screens. And don't want to demonize that, but I think there's been a real loss in terms of how fragmented we've become as a society in America. One phrase is we've traded our relationships for square footage of homes, and I think that struck a chord with me at least. So in the 1990s, that's when the internet and personal computers really exploded. For people in my profession, we saw a massive spike in things like internet pornography. It's just difficult to kind of overstate how much of an impact that had, men and women, but in a lot of ways, particularly men. And so that's one thing we saw there. The next big event that had such kind of a catastrophic impact on life was the iPhone. The iPhone came out in 2007, and something we see pretty dramatic decreases in teen mental health right after that. If you look from 2010 to 2015, that's when the graph starts to take a downward slope. Kind of some of the streams I'm going to talk about here They're from a book called The Anxious Generation. Some of you may have heard of it. Dr. Jonathan Haidt, he's a social psychologist up in Columbia, and a lot of the ideas I'm getting from him. So he talks about the decline of the play-based childhood, so children kind of don't have the healthy amount of unstructured time to play with one another. And now it's become a phone-based childhood. A lot of kids are kind of locked into their phones. Even kids early as 1-2 years old, you see them, attached to their parents' iPad or whatever. And again, I'm not here to judge anyone. It's tough to be a parent, and sometimes I think it's not the end of the world if you give your kid an iPad for a few minutes. But being locked into that world for hours and hours and hours, we're seeing a cost. So the next thing there, the great rewiring. So Dr. Haidt talks about that starting in about 2010, basically just what I just talked about. The way that young people are being socialized is radically different from how it was before smartphones, before iPads and all of that. So some of the kind of bigger issues that we see are increases in pornography addiction. These are for teens, not exclusively teens, but this is mostly teens here. Internet pornography, gaming addictions, gambling addictions, making oneself vulnerable to a predator. That's something that we see with online interactions. There's pretty big increases in anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicidality, loneliness, and you can kind of boil it down to all of these different things kind of fall into a few basic causes, which are sleep deprivation, social deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. So kind of any way you want to slice it, teen mental health has suffered in the past, at this point, 15 years or so. So mentally, emotionally, physically, relationally, spiritually, it's all taken a hit. That's overall. Those are kind of like big numbers, sociological numbers of the entire population. I do find that certain groups of people that I talk to, particularly Catholics, have a bit more of an understanding of some of the harms of some of these things. And so that can be a mitigating factor, a protective factor against some of these dangers, which is good, but it's still stuff that we've all got to be aware of. So one thing that we see as well, so in terms of how does it affect teenagers? Let's get a little more specific. So in the short term, we're finding that it harms girls more than boys. Social media is built around appearance, image, how you look, and status and social comparison. And we know that girls' relationships are a bit more relationally focused, and they are a little bit more kind of vulnerable to evaluation by others. So we see that having a really big impact on girls' self-esteem, where there's the social comparison, the body image, the relationship distress. We see men kind of bully each other a little more physically, a little more aggressively. Women, it's a lot of times more verbally or relationally. And we see that's a perfect kind of avenue for it is online too, where there can be less consequences immediately, at least, for that kind of behavior. So all of those things lead to increased anxiety, increased depression for young women. For boys, so I don't want to downplay how much it affects boys because it still has a significantly negative effect on them. Sometimes it can be a little bit less dramatic, especially kind of at the beginning. But over the long term, it's not necessarily less. So we're finding that young men have the tendency to withdraw. So they withdraw into video games, YouTube, pornography is another one. Just having free, often, not to be too explicit here, but often hardcore pornography at their fingertips is, it's really horrible, actually to put a young man in that situation where he is exposed to this and doesn't know how to deal with it. And so there's disengagement, isolation, and delayed maturity. So the kind of young men retreat into this virtual world. There's decreases in motivation for school, for work, for relationships, for getting out into the world and just kind of taking risks, things like that. There's delayed independence, delayed maturity, like I said, and a lot of young men are growing up and they're feeling kind of disengaged, kind of isolated. There's a big problem with young men who feel, disenfranchised and, like they haven't really, been able to get a shot in the world. And I want to say, there are things they can do about it, but it's tough. It's tough. It's really hard when, they've grown up in a world and they haven't necessarily been protected from certain things, or, they haven't been shown how to take initiative in certain ways. So they feel kind of stuck in that place. So getting into attention span, right? I think we all know the feeling of this thing just constantly pinging us, emails, texts, notifications, every 2 seconds. I think it's a fight to be present, for all of us, but particularly again for a sensitive, developing brain. Just multiply that, just multiply that. So these constant interruptions impair deep focus. They impair the ability to learn and to the memory and how we our memory matures and develops greater strength. They become trained for stimulation, just kind of the quick stimulation versus sustained thinking and deep concentration. Also, this just has significant harms in terms of learning, emotional regulation, creativity. If I'm just relying on something else externally to entertain me at all moments of the day, I'm not necessarily going to be challenged to create a game with my friends that we can enjoy and kind of create our own rules, create our own world, and everything that comes along with that. So another thing, like I said, kind of that decline of free play. So Dr. Haight talks about this actually starting in the 80s, where there was an increase in a sense of overprotectiveness of our children. There was less risk-taking that they were allowed to do, less opportunities for conflict resolution, less independence. And this kind of free play, so obviously structured time and engagement is really, really important, but there is also a need for that unstructured play. And that kind of unstructured play, can act as a sort of inoculation against adversity later in life. And what I mean by that is that when kids get in disagreements, when someone gets their feelings hurt, when someone cheats in a game, when someone falls and hurts themselves, or gets cut, in an accident, it actually provides a sense of confidence. Because they learn, okay, I can face difficult things and I can navigate them. I can move forward. I can handle these things. So it makes a huge difference in the confidence of young people and their ability to say, no, I can handle the world. I can handle the challenges that are going to come with me. So this sense of resilience, the sense of cooperation with other kids, other people, and the sense of emotional strength. Losing this makes kids more fragile. It makes kids feel like they can't handle life and kind of withdraw, and that's where the technology comes in. So it's kind of like we've lost these opportunities for sometimes difficult but necessary challenges, and we provided this whole world that they can go to and get all of their their needs met and all of their interests fulfilled, and it's virtual, and it's not actually helping them grow as people, as individuals. So the modern culture teaches us, especially kind of this message I think is geared especially towards kids. Okay, so number one, the world is a dangerous place. Number two, words are violence. Number three, discomfort is harm. And there's just three. And those are all partial truths. They're all partial truths. So we know that the world is a dangerous place, that there are a lot of bad things going on in the world. However, if we live in this kind of bubble where ourselves and or our children are, kind of overly protected from what's going on out there, it can be actually quite harmful. Can be quite harmful. Again, young people don't necessarily learn how to engage with the world, and there is a lot of good in the world too. There's a lot of good in the world too. So it can become kind of insular, and kind of there can be a fear-based mindset that discourages getting out there and doing something with life. Words are violence. So I think that this is where I think I see things a little bit differently from Dr. Haight. He's kind of big on how words are not violence, which I think is partially true. I think that we know as Catholics that words can be sinful, that words can hurt people. Certainly there's bullying, there's verbal abuse, there's all sorts of ways that we can use our words to hurt other people. But there is also a sense of they are just words, So there's a partial truth there. So they can be harmful, but they also are just words in another way. And there is a distinction there between someone doing something to you violently and someone saying something that makes that hurts your feelings. And this is kind of ties into the third one: discomfort is harm. So, and you're seeing this a lot on college campuses nowadays, where it's like, if I feel uncomfortable, if I feel hurt, that means someone harmed me. And I think that is just, it's very harmful to kind of like diversity of ideas and authentic learning. And it's also harmful to, again, that sense of resilience of I can talk to somebody who disagrees with me. I can face somebody who maybe they believe something that I find offensive. How do I get to know them? How do I try to interact with them and relate to them? And rather than just kind of claiming, okay, now I've been hurt. Now I've been hurt, and now I've been harmed, and you did something wrong, and you need to be punished because of that. Very, very unhealthy. Very unhealthy. So all of this kind of paints a picture of some of the negative things going on. So on the positive side, what do children need to grow up well? Children need, of course, shelter, food and water, things like that, but emotionally and psychologically, young people need safe attachment. Safe attachment is something that's kind of, it's a lot of people are doing some more reading about it, so again, you may be familiar with the concept. But having that place of having a sense of belonging, having a sense of safety, having a sense of being loved and cherished. Ideally, this is happening in the family, right? Where kids can come home and experience these things and really feel these things, because it's important not just to know it intellectually, that's good, but for people growing up and even for adults to actually experience and feel these things in community. And that domestic church is the first natural community that we have. Another thing that kids need is exploration and play. So kids need the opportunity to take risks, to make mistakes, to get hurt. Yes, again, in a somewhat controlled fashion. We don't want anyone to get seriously hurt, but to break some bones or get some bruises, and have the opportunity to be independent. So Dr. Haight actually talks about teaching his son to navigate the subway system. And he was age 11? Age 11, he was actually able to navigate the subway system. There was one time that he went out for a tennis match late at night and came back, and the subway was closed. What do? So the kid, based on what his dad had taught him, hailed a cab and got himself home. And they said, he as a parent learned something. His son was never more confident than after that event, And they've been able to give him increasing levels of responsibility now because he overcame this scary, adverse situation, and now he's better off for it, So when we don't allow children to have these kinds of experiences, to say it in a bit of a blunt way, but they're kind of robbed of that opportunity to prove themselves to themselves, because they don't know what they can do until they actually have to do it. Another big thing, social learning. So again, the world of screens is not the same as the real world. These interactions happen. So you post something, well, nowadays you hear back in 30 seconds, but it's not quite at the same time. It's not in real time. It's not in the real place. You're not looking someone in the eyes. There's a lack of accountability. And at the same time, the whole world is watching because everything you post does not disappear. It's always accessible for every employer for the rest of your life. So there's this kind of pressure. Actually, something I've been reading about is teens often screenshotting inappropriate things that even their friends are saying, so that, if for some reason they have to get some dirt on somebody else, they have it. And so then kids hear about that and they're like, well, I guess I have to do the same thing. I have to fight fire with fire. I got to protect myself too. And so there's this very toxic cycle of basically like something you say, some joke, something off color could blow up and the whole school could find out. And, you could have some serious repercussions for something that, we've all done things like that, And so this social learning, so having these real interactions, having the opportunity to navigate conflict, to act in a cooperative manner, learning it's not just about me. I can't just say what I want and have things go that way. I need to kind of bargain with other kids, and there's got to be some give and take there. And they kind of learn the healthy giving and receiving of relationships. Gradual independence. So doing more without adults watching. That's a big one. So, and a lot of adults feel a sense of anxiety with allowing their kids to do more and more away from them. And that's legitimate. That's totally legitimate. That's coming from a place of love for them, wanting to keep them safe and protect them. And also a sense of, fear of what could happen to them. Bad things do happen. But that's one of the biggest barriers is that anxiety of the parents. And we see again the example I talked about with Dr. Haight's child is that without parents watching, kids feel a sense of freedom. They don't feel micromanaged. They can actually have more stake and agency in a game. A lot of times when parents are around, they're kind of dictating the rules and kind of refereeing a little bit, which is fine. That's healthy. But they have the opportunity to organize in these little societies themselves, and that is really good for their mental and emotional and relational development. So safe attachment, exploration and play, social learning, and gradual independence. And smartphones disrupt all four of these. It hits all four of these square in the mouth. Kind of like, to sum it up in a way, modern childhood blocks the healthy development of children through overprotection in the real world, and then underprotection in the online world, where kids can find whatever is out there, whatever they want, whatever they stumble upon, access to all sorts of things that are inappropriate for them. As a clinician, I'm actually seeing in the past maybe 4 to 5 years, parents are just starting to kind of catch up how much parental controls need to be on devices and how much they need to be tuned into things. When this stuff came out, starting in the 90s, moving into, even the kind of like maybe 2010, 2015, I think a lot of parents didn't really know what was out there. There's just this new thing. Okay, my kid needs it. It's fun. It keeps them entertained. Maybe he needs it for school. That's all good. But kids were getting kind of, a lot of access to things that were harmful to them. It's a lot of young men come into me for pornography addiction for that very issue. So, again, and I just want to be clear. If you have done or not done any of the things that I'm talking about, that's okay. That's okay. We are a people of faith. We're a people of hope. And I think that, there's reason to believe that none of this stuff has to be permanent. There are sensitive periods, and when kids grow up in certain conditions, yes, that can be difficult to change. It's because it's very different from an adult being exposed to these kind of conditions. But that does not mean there's not hope. That does not mean that someone is a lost cause or anything like that. So there's absolutely reason to be hopeful. Recommendations. So Dr. Haight recommends no smartphones until high school, no social media until age 16, phone-free schools, so having schools either lock them in lockers or keeping them in backpacks, but you're not able to use them throughout the school day, and far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. So some other factors. So I was listening to a talk from a psychologist recently, and he was saying, with technology, and your kids, it's got to be do as I say and not as I do. And my immediate reaction was, that is never going to work. That's never going to work. Our kids do not operate that way. They do not operate as like, Dad said don't, but he's doing it. So I think that modeling healthy technology use is one of the most important things we can do. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But just keeping tabs on ourselves and our ability to put the phone down and be present with our loved ones, our families, is probably the most important thing. There are other important things as well. So parental controls and filters, having parental controls and filters on all of our devices, super important. Covenant Eyes is one of the well-known ones that can provide accountability software and or filtering software for devices. So I think that's really good. That's really necessary. Kids who are tech savvy, they know how to bypass it. So it's not an end-all be-all, but it is a necessary kind of good. Maximizing in-person activity and sleep. So what did I read recently? Teenagers in 2012 had an average of 122 minutes per day of face-to-face interactions with their peers outside of school. And it was, by 2018, it was cut in half. It was like 67 minutes, I think. So maximizing that in-person activity, whether that's with their siblings or with the parents, and also sleep. Sleep is another big one where we're seeing kids up late at night on laptops, on phones, being tired, unable to concentrate later, kind of in the day, the next day. And this is, a lot of sleep is actually especially important during this period of life where bodies and brains are developing and maturing. So maximizing in-person activity and sleep. Providing a clear structure to the day and the week. So kind of planning the day and the week, and making specific times for the family to get together. I call these kind of windows to put technology down. So kind of like a no phones at the dinner table, having a movie night or a game night, board game night once a week, where no one has any technology, not the parents, even the parents. There's a suggestion I read about called the digital Sabbath. So that's even having one day of the week where technology is not used. Now, not everyone can do that with the responsibilities that they have, but maybe you could limit that to an hour in the morning or an hour before bed or something like that. But having that day intentionally to focus on God, to focus on our families. Another important thing is just looking for the signs, looking for signs of problematic use or addiction. So sometimes we'll see things like young people, their technology use will be interfering with their lives. So we'll see a dip in grades. We'll see fractured friendships, fractured relationships with siblings, and moodiness in the kids, lying. Kids actually experience cravings for the internet, sleep deprivation, physical activity deprivation. They're not getting outside. They're not running around, exercising, and they're trying to stop. Sometimes kids even say, like, hey, I want to stop. I want to use my technology less, but they can't. They're struggling to do that. It's a genuine addiction in that way. Another thing there is increasing their mobility. I think giving young people access to the world in a healthy and incremental sense, it can be really helpful. There's nothing worse than a kid than being in his room, on a screen every night, every weekend, etc., and feeling like there's no sense of competence in interacting with the world. So encouraging kids to, around here there's not like the subway or the bus or anything, I don't think. But just even using bicycles to travel around to friends' houses when they're of age, allowing them to get their driver's license and being able to drive different places. I think that that increase in mobility can again give them a sense of life and confidence as they interact with the world. Talking with teens about the risks of the world, about the risks of technology, crucial topics like peer pressure, pornography, sex, drugs, alcohol, all of that stuff. Genuinely providing opportunities to educate them and to listen to them, to listen to their thoughts and their feelings, and just trying to understand them and help them feel understood, with what's going on in their lives. And I think that it's really best it's not like people talk about the talk, right? People talk about the talk, and I think it's not just one talk. I'm a big fan of integrating these concepts over time. So with things like theology of the body, we can start helping kids understand, which we all kind of have some innate sense, I think, anyway. But having, in a very clear way, the sense of the sacredness of our own bodies and the purpose of our own bodies. And so that, having those kinds of conversations over time and integrating those concepts over time, I think sticks more than just like hey, this is how babies are made. Okay, we're both uncomfortable, that's it. Okay. No, this needs to be part of our vocabulary. And it doesn't mean we need to, introduce kids to things that are inappropriate before they're ready for these concepts, but just slowly finding age-appropriate ways to expose them to the genuine risks of the world. So, giving teens more responsibility is another big one. So whether that's in the home, helping out with chores, whether it's at work, getting them a part-time job. In the community, they could, work at a camp or, become an Eagle Scout or, whatever it is that they can get involved with leadership, with responsibility. We know that's super good for maturity, super good for mental and emotional development. Something I was reading about is high school exchange programs, actually, where kids can go live with a family somewhere else in the country, and you could actually take in someone from someone else in the country. And on a smaller scale, like it's not international, but it's actually an opportunity to explore a different culture. There was actually a program designed to help people from the Midwest interact with people from the coasts, because there's this huge cultural divergence between the coasts. We call it, flyover territory, and that's how pejoratively people kind of refer to it. And so helping to kind of heal our broken nation is like, okay, how do we integrate, our families a little bit, even though we live a couple thousand miles away? So these high school exchange programs, I think, are a wonderful opportunity for that. And time in nature. I love to go camping, I love to go hiking, love to be in the outdoors. That's super important for me. It's also a really helpful part of my relationship with God. And I think that there's something special that kids can experience when they get that opportunity. When they can go on a camping trip with the family or with another family. Sometimes at campgrounds there's kind of a situation where they're able to interact with other kids, who are not from their family, which can be helpful as well for them. So those kind of just experiencing the excitement and the thrill of nature, I think is a really strong buffer against what technology has to offer, because while technology can offer something sweet in a sense, we know it's much more of an escape than a genuine, pleasurable good. So it might be a little harder, it might be a little more uncomfortable to be in nature, but they're going to learn a lot, they're going to enjoy it, and that taste of something that's deeper than, just a momentary pleasure, I think has a pretty big impact on them. So the last thing here is gap years. I'm actually a pretty big fan of gap years, so that's like between high school and college. And a lot of people are worried about that. They're worried about how that's going to look for college and for employment and all of that stuff. And I think that, I think actually it can be quite helpful for kids to spend time traveling, to spend time volunteering, to spend time at working, and even saving up for whatever it is, for a house, for college, whatever it is, all these things that cost a crazy amount of money these days. And so, because I think that when kids are just in, and I didn't take a gap year, but I think when kids are in just this mindset of school, and they don't get to experience all these other things in life, I think part of their education is missing. There's a lot we can learn from these kinds of different experiences. So, perfect. Okay. Well, that was a little bit of a fire hose. Just kind of wanted to throw as much at you as I could, because I only have one night with you. But that's my talk. And if anyone has any questions or comments, I would love to hear about your experiences with your kids or what you see in the world today. Absolutely. I couldn't point to a study, but I will tell you that just in my experience, there's a pretty significant difference. So, yeah, obviously anything can be abused. Movies all day and all weekend, and nothing else, can still hinder development. But it is still pretty different from, we call it, you've probably heard doom scrolling. Which is just totally numbing, totally unproductive, totally directionless. No, I mean, I love movies. I love movies myself, so yeah, I think it's a pretty different experience, watching a movie versus doom scrolling.
And sorry, a small question. I feel as if our children are probably, especially in sports, we're probably pressured more than we ever were as children to do a lot of different sports and spend probably more, at least in my experience, more time than I ever spent. And I was a pretty sort of wide-area athlete when I was a child. My children, it seems to me that they have something almost every single other week that limits their ability to just be children and be outside, and be with friends, and be brothers together in the house. Is there, again, clinical practice or studies, is there detriments to that are being noticed as well?
Yes. So, structured activities and sports are good. They're definitely a good thing. I think all kids should be involved in something, like that, whether it's sports or an instrument or whatever it is, where they're actually, intentionally trying to grow, trying to learn skills. Again, there's some of that play, that cooperation and conflict thing that they learn. But there is something, and it gets, as kids get a little older, it gets a little trickier, right? Because, idle minds is the devil's workshop kind of a thing, where, if kids are unsupervised and in certain contexts, they can actually get into quite a bit of trouble. We don't want to guard them from all of that trouble, but we do want to make sure they're not going too far with certain things. To answer your question, I think that supervised time and that structured time is really good, but I do think that there is something lost, because young people feel, in my experience, they feel so much pressure. They feel like they have to be an A+ student, and they have to be a captain on the football team, and by the time they're 21, they have to start their own business, and they have to be the president of their sorority or whatever. It's like, it's just the amount of pressure it's just hard to fathom. So I think that, just kind of like the freedom to play, the freedom to be themselves. Exactly what that looks like for each age group, and kind of the parameters we put on that is going to look a little different. But I do think it's important. Yeah. Kind of like and I have to remind myself of this, but kind of like the human beings, not human doings kind of a thing.
Have you encountered anything in terms of educating these kids in terms of what they're actually interacting with, how it works, why it does what it does, like why these algorithms? Obviously, they may not be able to understand, like this is the algorithm and how, but showing them, like, I read a book that said program or deprogram. Basically, if you understand what's behind the technology, you're a lot less susceptible to being manipulated by it. For example, it has almost no impact. Like Facebook, I don't care. None of those type of things have any. I work in technology because I understand what I'm being fed, and it has no. It doesn't capture my interest whatsoever because I just see it as like manipulation, not has no utility purpose because it's just manipulation. And I feel like if children understood more of what, especially with AI, like when I deal with AI, there's stories about kids like committing suicide and things like that. When I deal with it, it's just a stupid computer and I have no respect for what it has to say whatsoever. But if you don't have that kind of understanding, hey, I'm just talking some stupid bunch of bits, have you encountered anything in terms of like really kind of pulling back the curtain, and exposing the wizard?
Absolutely. I think you bring up a pretty good point about how social media in particular was designed by some very intelligent people as a business to keep people, young people included, locked into whatever they're selling for as long as possible, without really due consideration for the actual health of these kids. So I think that, I do think, kind of informing kids of that, kind of letting them know that, the people designing these programs don't necessarily have their best interests in mind. Especially for kids who I think are a little more thoughtful, a little more like they can really grasp that. I think that could be really helpful for them. Like I think it could click, where it's like, oh, this isn't just like some fun toy. Like this is somebody designed this to get me hooked to make a profit. Again, I don't want to demonize all of it, but there's a reality to that, absolutely. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I don't know if this is really that great of a question. Just a kind of insight. Because I'm thinking about, well, how do I feel about social media and whatever, and I fail to see. I understand why it's important, but like I fail to share that same draw. And I wonder like, well, why would me? And I think it's partly because I can see through the trick.
Yeah. I think for young people who grew up and this is kind of the culture that they've lived, and they kind of this is the world. This is the culture. This is the world. This is how it is, and it provides kind of that kind of quick hit, if you will, of instant interactions and all these things that you don't have to wait for, but it's totally unrealistic. They don't know that. They don't know that because that's the world that they've been raised in, and I think at the back of their minds they probably have some idea of that, but it's not. Yeah, it's kind of a vortex. It's kind of a vortex that they get sucked into.
Intentionally designed to obfuscate that. Like these phones they're magic. Like they literally, and that's it's indistinguishable from magic. Whereas when we were growing up, like our computers were like 30 pounds and sometimes didn't even run or whatever, crash all the time. So we had a sense of like this is a machine. Now it's like this magical escape.
It's getting more and more realistic too with AI. AI girlfriends is a big push. AI pornography, all that stuff.
To your point real quick, there is something to be said as a parent. You have to have an ongoing conversation with your kid about it, how you can get sucked into it. And if you're in the tech industry, you probably know what those pitfalls may look like, and you can teach your kid what to look out for. I mean, we have a leg up on that versus like me or a social worker, right? So so you really have that really thoughtful conversation with your child. I have a sixth grader, and I have a conversation with her about what that looks like in email, how you get sucked into some of these games. For example, Roblox is a big one, right? So, and I do have a conversation with her a little bit about it. But again, not to demonize the cell phone. I mean, there is some good about it, good and bad. If your child in sixth grade or seventh grade doesn't have a phone, somehow, especially an iPhone, you become like a social pariah. I hate to say it, but you are a social pariah. And you miss out on a conversation of this such and such class, and the girl chat, and the boys chat, and that does bring a community, that little sixth grade, seventh grade community together, I feel like.
I think it's a good point that it's not going away. It's
So
going to be part of their lives for the rest of their lives in some way. So it's difficult. They have to be exposed to it.
yeah, it's not going to go away, but if they get good parents who subscribe to their phone, go through their text messages and see what's there.
Exactly.
I think sometimes we forget that flip phones do exist. So I think for certain ages, I think I'm a pretty big advocate of flip phones, and Yeah, I mean, I think there's that difficult reality of you know, the challenges, especially if they're already in with these groups, or even if they're going to be in and everyone else is doing it. Like, how do we support them when this might be a pretty big wedge between them and a lot of other kids their age? At the same time, knowing the costs of, you know, just giving them like totally unbridled access to it. So, yeah. Covenant Eyes? Yeah, I think Covenant Eyes was the one that I mentioned. It's called Covenant Eyes. Yes, that's it. Yeah. So you can Google that. They have a website. They've got a lot of articles, and they've got it's a VPN that you can download onto different devices and have it watch and restrict access to certain things. You can also do most devices you can do parental controls as well in the settings, where certain social media or websites content, you know, can be blocked. And it's always good to, again, not just do that and kind of call it a day, but to keep checking up on it, keep having conversations about it, and about the logic behind it and why it's necessary. Because you know we wouldn't send our kids into a bad neighborhood by themselves, and I think that's what the internet is. You know, there's plenty of bad neighborhoods on the internet. Whatever. You know, so.
So for like your chats or whatever, growing up, like none of us actually talk about it, right? I remember as a teenager, like one phone in the house, and it like my big sister for time on the phone to be able to talk to my friends. And in today's world, I mean, as adults, we hardly ever actually pick up the phone and talk. It's usually a quick text here, quick text there. Is there benefit to encouraging our children to maybe like call a friend instead of always texting, and like to have like a conversation outside of just like a school, or like is there any studies on that, or is texting just as effective for that social growth and that, you know, being able to communicate and share, because you lose so much context of in text. You don't hear emotion. You don't know, like, you know,
Absolutely.
delay.
Absolutely.
You're like, are you thinking about this, or is this your immediate response? So,
Yeah.
any suggestions?
Absolutely. So, yes, yes. There's definitely a big difference between talking on the phone and texting, for how that is experienced and how it impacts a person psychologically. Actually, one of the exceptions that Dr. Haight talks about in terms of technology use for young people is FaceTime. You know, if they're FaceTiming family members or friends, that can actually be really good and really healthy. You get the face-to-face, you get the same time, so it has that personal aspect. It's not the same as playing with somebody who's there, obviously, but it's kind of the closest thing to it in terms of the interactions that we have online. So that can be really beneficial. So I think there are some pretty significant benefits to talking on the phone or FaceTiming versus just texting.
So I have two questions. This is open for a second. First is when somebody, a student, teenager comes to you for help, how do you evaluate the experience it, the severity of the situation itself? So that's question one. Question two is, how do you look at sort of the treatment or the remedies that are required in order to provide help and training?
Okay. So the first one, how do I evaluate how severe it is?
Severity of the situation.
Yeah. So I think that, there's kind of like easier objective measures of just like how much time are you spending on your phone per week? Is it like 10 hours a week? Is it like 30, 40 hours a week sometimes? especially with everything at school. So making that differentiation between, like, you know, you're working at school, that's one thing. But you know, your time outside of school, how much time are you spending on the screen? So that's a nice objective measurement. But there's also kind of a more subjective inquiry of how this is affecting a person. You know, so are most of their interactions with other people virtual versus in person? You know, do they feel that they use technology or social media as an escape? That's another common one that we see. So basically, you know, the effects that it's having, some things I mentioned, like, you know, fractured relationships with peers or family, sleep deprivation, you know, they're not going outside and playing and getting exercise and taking care of themselves, you know, kind of the extent to, you know, how much of an impact that's having on, and on how they feel. You know, are their anxiety up, depression up, you know, thoughts of suicide up, things like that. You know, these are all ways that we can measure if it's kind of on the more severe end or on the more mild end. And then, can you remind me your second question?
So what the treatment or remedies are to course correct, right? How do you fix the problem? That's the question.
Yes. Okay. So, if, you know, kind of in a situation where there's already some problematic, you know, technology use, I think attacking the issue from both sides, I think limiting or eliminating access, kind of first step. So with addictions, the treatment of addictions, step one is always sobriety. You cannot treat an alcoholic if he's still drinking. He's not going to make any progress. Now, sometimes the beginning part can be helping him, you know, find other sources of support. So, because when there's a vacuum, like, it's awful. It's very, very painful, and, you know, you can't just take away the alcohol. You know, you need to, you know, provide other forms of support in a person's life. So, you know, kind of along those lines of, like, okay, how do we significantly reduce or eliminate technology access? And going along with that, how do we introduce other forms of connection, of play, of learning, you know, again, as much in person as possible, with the family, with friends, you know, from the neighborhood or school. How do we provide those opportunities for people, for young people, so that they can actually get to experience it? You know, because I think that they're gonna know the difference between the virtual world and the real world once they get to experience it. It really is an addiction, and with any other addiction, I've never talked to an alcoholic who's like, I wish I hadn't gotten sober. It's like, no, I think once they get a taste for the goodness of life, they're gonna continue to want it. That doesn't mean they don't need guardrails and that they don't need any kind of supervision or restrictions. Yeah. Again, I don't know. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay.
Well, I like alcohol, you can't just take the phone away, you know what I mean? And without going to stop alcohol, you get to have a thought all day. It was remain being sober. But this phone is necessary in many cases. You need it for almost communication. When you're working, you might need it. You know, these young adults, these kids become adults, they will need the phone. So they need to have some kind of healthy relationship with this phone. And this would be, what is the conversation you have with them about that?
So that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It is not the same, yeah, as some of the other things, some of the other addictions, because there are even adults that I know that have flip phones, or that have, they call them, there's a phone out there called a Wise phone instead of a smartphone. It's a Wise phone, and it does, I think, maps. I'm not sure if it does emails, it does text and calling, and that's it. So there are resources out there for people who simply get to a point where they can't handle having a phone because the addiction's too strong. So Yeah. I think that, I mean, if a person needs access to their email or some of the amenities that the smart students have, that does get a little more complicated. I think, again, depending on the age, just I mean, especially for younger people, though, having that conversation, having genuine restrictions where okay, at 10 o'clock the parent takes the phone. You might need it at certain points during the day, but you don't need it after 10. Or at least an hour before bed. That's when it starts to interfere with sleep, things like that.
How to get involved basically in therapy. I mean, really, it's having fully vetted and involved. It doesn't really, you can't put responsibility on the 13-year-old, for example. The 13-year-old doesn't have that kind of self-discipline. I don't get anything at least to say, hey, you know what? It's 9:30. I'm gonna put the phone away. I mean, maybe they'll go for I don't know a day or two, but
Yeah.
they're not that.
No, that's. I think that's spot on. I think that's totally spot on. Yeah, it's we want to give kids increasing responsibility, but we don't want to give them responsibilities that they can't handle, that they're not ready for. And that might be one that they're not ready for, and that's where the parent can step in.
I was going to say, I'll come back to your John's question around the remedy or the solution for an issue with self-addiction or overuse. I think our generation of parents probably have a harder time than previous generations with providing something for our children to do. You hear often that they're bored. It's okay to be bored. Learn how to be bored. Learn to deal with boredom, because if you remove this from their day, they don't really know what to do anymore. So I think it's really important that it's kind of incumbent on parents these days to at least steer them in a direction that is doing something that isn't this. If you're taking it away from their use of it, it's a challenge. I don't get anything. I remember when I was a child, the parents used to say video games are going to destroy our generation. I would get anything for my children to play video games the way we did and not have these starts. At least it was semi-so. At least you were in the same room playing with your friends. Now you're just isolated on your phone. It's not really what you're
No, I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is such a challenge for yourself. So it's great to see other people get it's helpful to see this matters to other people. I've heard of some of these things about communities or schools, pushing them to do this together as a school or community. Do you think that is counterproductive? Do you have to just make a decision as a family and stick by that, or do you see those kinds of things being helpful?
I think it starts there. It starts with the personal decision of modeling, and then it starts with the family, kind of basically after that. And I think it really can provide a pretty strong buffer against a lot of these issues that I'm talking about. However, I would say that getting into advocacy, and talking to schools and having schools actually change their policies would do a lot to support this kind of and provide all these buffers against some of the harms and dangers. So I think I think it'd be better. I don't really see it. I don't really see it. Like, it's not something I've actually seen. I haven't seen a school who's done this yet. So that's why I'm here, But I think it'd be great. But I also see certain parents probably pushing back against that. So it's kind of a complicated situation that's a bit of an extension. But ideally, I think it would be a positive thing.
Thank you very much, John.
Just one thing, if I can. I got a lot of my information from these books. So The Anxious Generation is a big one, and this one I haven't really delved into too much. It came out 15 days ago. The Amazing Generation, Dr. Haidt and Catherine Price got together and they made, it's sort of like a graphic novel So it's a little bit more kid-friendly, but it gives a lot of education, to your point, of kind of the dangers and the nature of phones, social media, etc., and alternatives. Importantly, again, we don't just take away the bad thing. It's like, okay, what are the alternatives? What can kids do? What activities and games can they participate in together? So just want to give you guys these references. I think they can be really helpful for you. So.
Well, thank you again, Gian. I'm grateful for. Thank you again, Gian. I'm grateful for your presentation to us. The importance of Catholicism and psychology coming together in a profound way that gives us handles by which we begin to reassemble both our spiritual and our communal and personal health. I had read The Anxious Generation right when it came out, and it was amazing how new the ideas seemed to me, but they came from real hardcore observation and measurement science from someone not coming from a faith perspective. I remember one thing you would know far better than I. He said that for a phone-free school, it has to be every family agreeing and every parent agreeing. Once there's one break, it falls apart. So the notion is it is possible, but it really takes a community. And working through difficult issues, hard issues, endurance issues, painful issues, because oftentimes what's magnified in social media is what's already our pains and our hurts and our hardships just get a bigger profile there. So it always returns to that important connection. But thank you very much for being here and for your words. There's literature about integrity counseling services. It's on the table by the flag back there, and a card with some contact information and things like that. Why don't we just have a final prayer? Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you, and have a very safe ride home. Thanks for coming out tonight.